I've got April Hanna and Jude Goldman. And full disclosure, April Hanna was both of our therapists.
Hey, I cannot confirm nor deny that. That is HIPAA protected. But if you would like to share with the world, that is up to you.
No, I'm saying we will share it because we'll probably mention it a few times today. And I don't care. Throw it out there. I think more men should have therapists.
I agree.
I think everybody should have a therapist, quite honestly. I think it's really awful. My mouth's blue because I took a taupe blue. So just bear with me through it. It's my Adderall. So anyway, I just do a better job with it. And I think it's probably placebo, but anyway, so today we are going to talk. You have a book out, and the name of the book. What is the name of the book as a whole?
It's a little long, but I brought it with me here. It is The Grief Experience: Tools for Acceptance, Resilience, and Connection. And I helped to co-author this with a handful of other authors as well. The lead author is Kelly Doherty, who is a coworker of mine and social worker who led the project. So.
What are the origins of how did you guys come together on the book?
Well, I had my office in the same place where Kelly was working. So, during the pandemic, everything kind of, went crazy for everybody. Mm-hmm. And I had to bring my business online. And then once things started opening up, I was looking for new office space because I ended up moving also during the pandemic out of Saratoga County into Fulton County. Yeah. So they just happened to be opening up a practice and they had one office space left and they knew that I was looking for office space. So they asked if I wanted to come and just join them down there. So it was a group of about 7 other social workers, and I'm a mental health therapist. So it's a little bit different, social workers and mental health therapists. But I moved in there and was just doing my practice, and Kelly and another coworker, Sherry Davies, who's also in this book, they got approached by another woman who was doing something very similar, a collaborative book effort called Holistic Mental Health. So they were looking at authors to join that were really talking about holistic mental health. And Kelly and Sherry ended up doing that book. Kelly decided she wanted to do a book of her own, but really wanted to have a grief book out there that covered a lot of different types of grief. Because typically when you go and buy a grief book, it's specific to that type of grief.
Absolutely.
So she was able to collect 25 different stories of different types of grief to put in this book. So it really is just a great collection for anyone that's experiencing any type of grief to pick it up. And so she asked if I wanted to do it. And I said, no, not really. I was like, I don't know, kind of seems like a lot of work. And I don't know if I really was ready to put my story out there, to be honest.
Yep.
And so she kept pushing and pushing. She's like, come on, this would be great. This could get your art out there a little bit more. She saw when I was teaching classes, because I was co-facilitating some grief groups with her, I would bring my art technique in and people would just love it. They would heal really quickly. And so she was pushing me and I finally said, okay, I'll do it. And then I decided, well, I could probably help these guys out with my podcast. So I was bringing the authors onto my podcast to help promote the book.
Oh, promote it. Great.
Yeah. And I'm happy that I said yes and did it. So it was a good experience. So that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah. And I got to say, I've had many, many, many times. I just recently had someone come to me to talk about my life, to do a talk on my life. And I've always been reluctant to do it because it is, as you well know, I mean, it's a goddamn fucking shitstorm when you hear the whole thing. But I was kind of reading it, and you threw it right out there. You weren't. I want to start kind of where your chapter and just kind of summarize that. But boy, you didn't pull any punches. I mean, I feel like I should be saying, okay, let's start. Please tell me about your earliest childhood memory. I feel like that's how we should start. So, but because I think that's one of the questions you get asked. But yeah, just what? So your childhood growing up, you had a mother who was had addiction issues.
Yes.
Was that through your whole life? Was that the way it was?
Whole life. Yes.
And she wasn't messing around with cannabis. She was doing heavy duty drugs and drinking.
That's right. I mean, she had periods of sobriety, like her pregnancy. She was sober during my whole pregnancy, thank God.
Okay.
And then, kind of on and off throughout her life. I mean, she started with drugs and alcohol really early. My mom had really compounded trauma throughout her whole life with losing her father when she was 2 or 3 to a heart attack and being raised by my Italian grandmother,
Oh,
trying to raise 3 kids,
right,
3 jobs. It was just like really intense for her. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely, like you said, pull no punches in my
right.
book, and that's kind of who I am as an individual, right? I think the both of you
Mhm.
can attest to that. That I don't really beat around the bush, and it was a pretty intense chapter to write, I would say,
Mhm.
and a lot of people have given me. It almost seems like the feedback people really don't know what to say. They're kind of like, I read your chapter. Good job. It's almost, and I could feel it's one of those things with grief, right? You never know what to say. Don't want to say the wrong thing. I think that I really wanted to be vulnerable because that's what the publisher had said. Like, what is your most vulnerable moment in your grief experience?
Yeah.
And I put it out there. And so, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you with the questions, but yeah, my mom did struggle through, most of my whole life with addiction. It was primarily alcohol. Although I remember when I was little, my mom had one of those cookie tins that she'd keep all of her paraphernalia in. This was a purple cookie tin, and there'd be pot in there, there'd be cocaine in there would be other, things of that sort. And I just always, remember her going in and out of rehab. I lived quite a bit with my grandmother for a large portion of my life when my mom was going in and out of rehab. And I would say a really tough year was 6th grade. I don't know what happened, but usually in the summertime, I would go up to Tannersville, New York, and be with my grandmother for the
Mhm.
summer. And my mom just must have let loose one summer because my aunt and uncle got involved and took custody of me and actually went through the court. And I had to move to Catskill, New York, and go to school there. And there were all of these,
My, oh my, yeah.
situations that my mom had to do in order to like get custody back. And then she found sobriety about 10 years when I was in my 30s. And that was when she had really had struggled with heroin for quite a while, and my grandmother had passed away. So there's like a whole story with that. While she was using, my grandmother dies. We can't find my mom. There's like a bunch of crazy stuff going on.
Wow.
And then we actually ended up having my mom arrested because she was stealing things and pawning things from my grandmother's house to buy her drugs and writing checks. And we were finally able to find her, get her arrested, and then she found 10 years of sobriety.
After all that,
After
okay.
all of that. And then her life partner, who she was with for a very long time, ended up passing away. And then her sister passed away. And then
Oh,
it was downhill from there
from that
up to the
point.
day that she died.
Wow. And so the thing that was interesting about you, you had a sense that at some point you could lose your mom and it was going to be and not a normal process or a normal, pass away from, old age or disease. You just kind of knew something was up. Can you get into that a little bit too?
Yeah. Gosh, I can't remember how old I was. I feel like I might have been in college.
Hmm.
And I think this was the time when we had first found out that my mom, like, she was just acting like really strange and a little spacey. And then I noticed like marks on her arms, and we kind of came to learn that she was using heroin. And there was a period of time where she just kind of went missing. Nobody heard from her. We didn't know what was going on. And it was really difficult to like find her. I think she was still living with my grandmother at the time. And I had bought her a mother-daughter charm, kind of like a best friend
Oh
necklace,
yeah.
where you break half and half off for
Yeah.
Christmas in the hopes that she would show up for Christmas. But I bought it with the intent to keep it if she passed away, that I would bury her with it, So, because I just was like kind of feeling like her life was really just out of control at that time. And our biggest fear was that she was probably going to OD on heroin or get involved with some people that would hurt her.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And she never showed up for that Christmas. And so I had this like mother daughter charm just kind of sitting there. But it was with the intent of okay, if she dies and we find her, at least this is something that I could bury her with and have like a piece of jewelry. And but I think when you grow up with a family member or a parent with addiction, my mom had pretty heavy addiction too. When I like really think about it, you're always thinking they're going to die. I mean, I would be left home at, 5, 6, 7 years old at night. My mom would go on a bender and I'd wake up the next morning and she wouldn't be there. I'd have to call family members. Anybody heard from my mom? Get myself dressed, get ready to school. So, there were times ever since I could remember, it's like, is she going to come home? Is she alive? Is she dead? So it's been like a theme all throughout my entire life,
Yeah.
always anticipating that.
Right. It's so the day that the state trooper, do you mind talking about this at all? Or
No, hey, it's out
okay.
there. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure. So you're at home, 5 o'clock in the morning. You're probably sleeping, and the doorbell rang. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it was a New York State trooper, Trooper Stanley.
Yes.
Yes, and Trooper Stanley was there, and you knew. Explain that whole thing, because I found that fascinating. I have been through your therapy. I know you actually, in therapy session. I don't even know if you remember this, but I was getting a little defensive about my life. You're saying, go ahead and you went through the whole document. My mother. You never asked me about my father. And I was like, geez, well, you were doing it. I was like, why didn't you ask me about my father? And as we're going through it, you were asking me questions, and you had a look on your face, and I thought you were being critical of what I was telling you, because a lot of people don't believe what I tell them when I tell them about what happened to me. So you said to me, I just don't know how open-minded you are. Well, I don't know how open-minded I was then. I'm pretty open-minded now, but I think that may have been the beginning of that. And you said to me, well, she says, your father is standing right next to you and he's holding his heart. I was like, what? And you go, yeah, he's right there on your left side. And you said he wanted me to let you know he died in the road, not the driveway. And I was like, what the fuck? Because no one except 2 other people knew that. And I was like, it blew me away. It really did. I didn't even know what to say at that point. It was a very humbling experience. So I guess the point I'm making with this is you have that ability that there's a lot of frauds, but you have that ability to see something that most people don't see. So when you're talking about the death of your mom and you have this vision of this happening or feeling or an intuitive feeling, I think you're saying you knew, people doing drugs. I've known people have kids and that's what they're waiting for all the time. But you kind of had a little bit tuned in, you're a little more tuned in to what's going on in that place we can't see. So that's what happens. So you start with the state trooper. He comes, you talk to him, and
yeah. So I might even start a little bit before then.
yeah, go ahead, whatever you think.
Because and I would say, a lot of people that grow up and have somewhat of a traumatic background tend to have really strong intuition, because for me, being younger, I had to sense and intuit people's energies immediately. So my mom would bring men home, or, okay, new boyfriend of the week. You're constantly assessing, am I safe? Is this a good person, bad person? And ever since I was young, when my mom, would go out or drink, I was not realizing at the time, but basically doing remote viewing when I was very, very young. Okay. I would go out of my body, connect and look for her and find her and kind of feel intuitively, is she still alive? So I had like a very psychic connection with my mom that I could always check in on her through consciousness, leaving the physical body and, tapping in. So in 2019, it's very difficult to put into words, but I began to feel the energetic threads connected to my mom start to loosen. And I started just kind of having this feeling that something's going to happen. Things aren't going really well. She was in a really bad relationship with a man that was very physically abusive to her. I had gotten a few phone calls that year from her therapist saying, your mom just called, somebody stole her car. She's not making any sense. We've called the ambulance. Can you go down and, get her? And that's when I ran down and rescued her dog Bowie from her and brought Bowie home with me. So many of my clients have met Bowie,
I've met them.
and
Yeah.
you've met Bowie. Yeah, sweet dog. So, so there were like phone calls and things like that was happening. And I could tell that, she was just really decompensating a little bit with the addiction had a pretty strong hold on her again. And so during that year, I was getting a lot of intuitive dreams, and her life partner, Bob, who I wasn't a huge fan of his. We got along okay, but when he was
I guess.
sober, I liked him, but
Right.
but he started coming to me in my dreams, and I thought, well, that's weird. Why is Bob trying to get my attention? And then I had a premonition. I had a vision in a dream that a state trooper came to my door to notify me that my mom was dead. And I had woken up, and that was a bit of a nightmare, but it was kind of dreams like that. And on my podcast in July, I interviewed a woman by the name of Robin Lansong, who was a woman that had a couple of near-death experiences and was basically brought back to life through this tribe in Africa, I believe it was Africa, who would sing a person's soul back into them. So they kept singing her soul back into her to help her come alive. And now Robin, what she does is she basically sings the soul back into people. So I had her on my podcast in July.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And she says, "Can I sing for you?" And I was like, "Yes." Now, this was the time of the podcast where I think we were still doing stuff on Skype, thank God, because there was no video. And you can listen to it. It's like 10 minutes at the end of this podcast. She says, "Oh, before I sing for you, I am getting another woman's energy that is connected to you that I feel like you're really worried about. Is that true?"
Oh, boy.
And I was like, "Yep, my mom." And I told a little bit of what was going on there. And this is the crazy thing. If you want to get goosebumps, she said, "I'd like to sing for her protection."
Oh.
So now I was thinking, okay, she's intuitively picking up. She knew nothing about my mom, my relationship, nothing. I was just thinking like, great, I'm going to get a song sung to me. This is beautiful. And she went deep really fast. So I was thinking she was singing for her protection because of the man that she was with who was physically abusing her. Little did I know months later that my mom was going to be struck by a vehicle crossing the street at night. And so then that leads us to October 19th, Saturday morning at 5 a.m., my doorbell rings and it's the state trooper. Now, I had a class that I had to teach that Saturday morning. So, I go and I look out and all of a sudden, there's a state trooper fully dressed to the nines. And he had a paper in his hand and, it's 5 o'clock. So it took me a while to register, about 10 seconds. And I was like, oh my God, my mom's dead. So he opened the door and I shocked him. I know he'll never forget me because he opened the door and he said, "Are you April Hanna?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And, he introduced himself and he said, "I'm really sorry, but your mom's been in an accident." And I said, "She's dead, isn't she?" And he just kind of stood back and was shocked. And then he kind of went like this, tilted his head to the side and he goes, "How did you know that?" And I was like, "Oh, I just knew. These are things." I'm like, "How much time do you have?" I'm like, come on in. But the other interesting thing in that moment, and you may know this, but I worked for many years with combat veterans and working a lot with police officers. And I also worked at an Air Force base. And I remember there was a gentleman, an airman, when I was working on the Air Force base who was the death notification person. And he came down to talk to me because the Air Force and the military implemented psychological health directors to go to every base because of the rate of suicides within the military population. So I was down there basically providing more EAP support to the airmen. And I sat with this airman and listened to him for a couple of sessions about the grief that he had having to be the notifier of when people died.
God.
So I immediately, when that trooper was there, I went into protection mode of him.
Interesting.
Because I knew what a horrible job that is. So I did my best to keep myself. I went into therapist mode, right? I kept my composure, let him know I'm okay, let him know I'm a therapist. I can handle this because he wasn't supposed to leave me. until somebody came to my apartment. And I was like, "No, that you're totally fine. I have people that I can call." And then like now looking back, I should have waited till somebody came,
Yeah.
and I definitely shouldn't have drove that day and stuff like that. But it's so weird, like in those moments, all of these things that come back, that not only was I in shock of hearing how my mom passed, but then I'm like worried about this trooper. And then I'm worried about all of the other, paramedics and people that had to view the scene and see the scene. As a therapist, I'm thinking about all of this trauma that just happened in this one night for so many people, including myself. But it was a really surreal day
Oh,
to be notified like
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So that's how the notification came. A very long story to your first question here, Bob.
No, I read it. I felt your. I think that's why it's a great chapter. We've all had something occur in our lives like that, where you have to confront the worst thing in the world. There's just no hiding. There's no avoiding it, and just how you deal with it. And later on, though, it sounded like it manifested itself in your health, and
Sure did.
it was just pressing. And I don't think in today's world people think about that. Well, professionals, I don't think doctors or anyone. I think mental health is such a something we just don't want to talk about. It makes us all uncomfortable. I'm totally not. I think we should talk about it. We've been on podcasts where we've spoken about mental health, but so you went and stuffed it away, and it was during COVID, so nothing was normal and everything was prolonged. So you had to live with it a little longer, a lot longer than you normally would, and you just started to have health issues. Isn't that correct? In the
Yeah, and the strange thing was too is that I was manifesting pain on the side that my mother's body was hit as well.
ah,
Mm.
So, it was like I could feel it in my bones. And yeah, so when she passed, there was a whole investigation. So anytime something like this happens, and I didn't know this, I had never gone through somebody ever being hit by a car before or dying as a result of it, but
mhm.
they have to do a whole investigation. So I wasn't able to get any of my mom's belongings until February. Now, my mom at the time was also homeless because her and her boyfriend had gotten kicked out of the retirement home that they were living in because of their drunken arguments and police needing to be called. So they were living in a motel. And like I said, the guy and I didn't get along, and I had to be police escorted to the motel room to try to get any of my mom's belongings,
Wow.
which
Oh, gee.
yeah, which he refused to give to me, which didn't make any sense to me because I'm thinking, this guy doesn't own this hotel room. They're living here on government assistance. Like, where are my rights as a family member to be able to get my mother's belongings? But I'm sure there was probably drugs in there or whatever.
Right.
And so, I ended up only getting a bag of her stuff and what she was wearing that day, her pocketbook, her cell phone, and a couple of other belongings and stuff. So, there was like when we had to write this chapter in the book, you only got 3,000 words.
Oh,
This is like, there is so much that happened just in the first 48 hours of this whole experience that could be a whole book in itself. So I also had kind of like trauma and grief from that situation. And then finally come February, the accident report and everything, the investigation gets closed. I go to
Mhm.
the police office or to the sheriff's office and I get her box of basically just clothes that she was wearing in her pocketbook and kind of held on to that for a while and stuck it in my garage. But that was also something that was like kind of looming over me. Like, what do I do with these belongings? And it was intense. I mean, the clothes were ripped. There was blood, there was hair, there was stuff, there was still glass in her um sweatshirt, from the accident. And here I am like holding this. So, me and energy, I'm also thinking like, my God, what am I supposed to do with this stuff? Right. And but didn't want to give it away because it was the last thing that I had of my mom's on the day that she died. And then we get thrown into COVID. The great thing about COVID was I fell in love and met my husband. So I got married,
congratulations.
last year.
Oh, that's
So
big news.
yeah, so that was also challenging too, right? To be grieving and then also like find love of my life and
Right.
have all of that. And so I thought I was good, right? Because I had fallen in love. Now I moved in with my husband,
Yep.
figuring all out the whole COVID thing. And it was like a January. We were playing guitar. I was teaching myself how to play guitar. And I thought that I had pulled something in my back because I was teaching myself. We were like just jamming for like 2 hours. And I woke up that next morning with like really sharp pains in my left breast, in my stomach, in my side. I couldn't breathe very well.
Boy, yeah.
And, I went from being extremely healthy, going to my primary care physician just once a year for a checkup. I mean, I've always been in great health.
Mhm.
So all of a sudden, like running to the emergency room twice in 1 week. And I was really short of breath, could barely walk without losing my breath. And then these unexplainable pains that were going on in my stomach and in my body. So I went to a cardiologist, a pulmonologist. I went to an ENT doctor. I had every single thing in my body looked at, x-rayed, ultrasound, thought maybe I had breast cancer, had to get a biopsy. I mean, it was just really intense. And getting blood work, finding a functional medicine doctor, going to my acupuncturist, doing all the things. And all the results kept coming back as we don't know what's wrong. We just see inflammation. And when you're grieving and when you're stressed, your body can
Right.
create inflammation, as well. So after I kind of stopped panicking, because I was just like, am I dying? What is going on?
Oh, yeah.
I had to lean back into kind of what I know from the energetic perspective of, our emotions and our body and our spirit. We are all interconnected. So then I had to really start taking a look at the grief, feeling it, addressing what am I going to do with my mom's belongings here? How can I begin to heal? Because my body was just screaming at me. So that is kind of where it led me into taking another course with a teacher during the COVID times. And he had a couple of exercises to put us through meditations and then asking us to create art out of it. And when I started to do that, my pain and my symptoms started to go away and decrease. And I also went through a very intense fire ritual and ceremony with a group of women that I see every single year down in the Phoenicia area. And it just so happened it was a fire ritual that day. So I was able to bring my mom's box of clothes and allow people to witness
You
all of
burned
that.
both
And
of
I burned it.
you burned
And that was energetically amazing, not only for my mom, but also for me and for the both of us, because that really shifted more things in my body. I think it shifted things for my mom's soul and even more completion of not staying attached to the earth reality.
Mhm.
And so, in doing ceremony and doing art, I went back into my own therapy and did more eye movement therapy because the other thing that probably wasn't a good thing that I was doing was also remote viewing the accident to put pieces together. So like I was intuitively able to see what happened that night in more of that altered consciousness.
Mhm.
Um, even before I got the police report. So the police report verified kind of what I was seeing in my mind. And so that I was re-traumatizing myself by going back to the accident scene and seeing where she was that night and what was happening and all of that. So I needed to get some eye movement therapy, which works great for trauma. And, did some of that. And that really helped too, because I was having some PTSD symptoms of not being able to walk Bowie, not being able to walk the dog. All of a sudden, like cars, me being on a street and watching cars go by quickly, I would just keep seeing them hit my mom, hit
Oh,
my mom, hit
man.
my mom. So I wasn't hit. I didn't witness the scene, but then all of a sudden I became hypersensitive to traffic and people being on the street and walking. And it was really hard for me to actually be out there and walk him without just constantly thinking about that.
I,
Can I ask you a question about the soul tethering? So, like, did you still feel psychically connected to your mom even after the physical body passed?
I
Like, at
did.
what point? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm still connected to her. I can feel when she kind of makes some transitions and is doing her own work. But what was interesting was when I checked in with her, she had like in spirit, she went to a bar after. And she popped out of her body. I had like this whole vision of her being at a bar and she was pissed off. She's like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "What the fuck are you doing here? Like, come on." It's like,
Yeah.
even in this reality, you're still kind of like not giving this up a little bit. So it was really interesting because I think because of the shock, she might have had some time really adjusting to understanding a little bit of what was happening, what was going on. I felt like that there was some resistance still and anger. But then I did feel her reaching more peace, making that transition into the light and now I feel like she's in a much better place and, we still communicate with each other and I feel like we're still healing our relationship while she's in spirit. So I'm still very connected to her consciousness.
I was just going to say, you're talking about art. I know someone else who went through the god awfulest trauma from the time they were a child, and they, from their child right to their adulthood, they were involved in this horrific situation that just was perpetuated over and over and over again. Wasn't drinking, but had been through so much trauma, very suspect stuff. I had often talked about the MK Ultra thing where attached to the military a little bit and probably was being used by networks, still evil individuals. But anyway, went through the light thing and straightened their life out, went through a year of that and really, really unbelievable success story. But in the very beginning, art every day, drawing. And, it actually was a therapeutic process that probably got them through this god awful realization that they came to at one point with what was going on with them. And it was art and meditation and yoga. Those were the three things that, really enforced the healing process for them. So when you're saying that, I'm like, oh, that's a real thing, art and music too, learning to play an instrument.
Yeah.
I've heard that over and over again. It was interesting. You had done some life after death stuff too. And I'm just wondering, and I got to say too, you had brought me through a clearing process. I just want to say this because when you're talking about this in your own perspective, you have helped people. You helped me tremendously. I don't know what would have happened to me if I hadn't gone to therapy. And Jude had made the referral because then you were loaded with clients too at the time. So I wasn't even sure you were going to end up taking me. But
right.
I think you said like, well, this is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. I'm going to talk to listeners.
Yeah, I was like, this sounds pretty interesting.
But one thing that you did do in a clearing, you had cleared my chakras in this process. And you described my cell. We didn't have cells. I was in a barrack. I was in a military prison. And you described that right to the color of the fucking locker. I was like, as we were going through the process collectively, I was like, I became a believer. I became a believer in that. And I don't know that I was very open-minded at that particular time in my life. But it definitely, when you're talking about this stuff, I'm like, and I've had since, good or bad, I've had some experience with a lot of people who had very, very severe trauma. And so when you talk about it, I'm like, oh, yeah. And people who have not been through this and don't understand it are skeptical of it. I often, I don't know how to explain it other than you have to, put yourself in that position and allow yourself to go through the process in order to understand it. Wouldn't you say, Jude, you've been through a whole similar thing?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things about grief too. There's no like right or wrong way to process it, right? It's just allowing it to pass through you, accept what you're going to learn from it, and hopefully come out on the other side like not too damaged.
Yeah. So let's talk about life after death. I got just a couple of things, as long as we have you here.
Sure.
What is your conclusion? What is your conclusion in life after death? What's in today's society? We have, there's a lot of atheistic belief systems now, more probably than ever. There's, people are going to alternative sources of belief systems that aren't necessarily the healthiest choices that they can make. I'm just curious, you've talked to over 40 people in that particular than you. Is that correct when I say that?
Well, close to almost 500, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, I was reaching for
That's a lot of people.
it.
Well, I mean, on my podcast, right, we're almost up to 500 episodes, and that since I've been making the films through Path 11 Productions on the afterlife, that journey really started in 2008. So I interviewed a handful of people for those documentaries, and I'm actually working on a documentary right now on after-death communication. And so I've been researching this for a while. I don't know, do the math since, 2008, which really prepared me for my mom's death too. I think in many ways it helped me lean into some of these theories, concepts that I learned along the way. And I think if anybody truly tells you they know, run, because I don't know. I'll
Oh,
know when I get there.
interesting. Okay.
But I have some theories that feel true to me because of my experiences. So, like when you were talking about when I was working on you and, clearing the chakras, but then, some of this information had come up. It's really hard to put, I think, consciousness into words. The human language really um, cheapens it a bit because the human language can't explain many of these experiences. And I think until you have experiences, everything else is just a belief system. And, one of my teachers says, you don't get anything for believing. So what if you believe it? Have you experienced it? Like, be your own explorer, find out for yourself.
Right.
So that has been what I have tried to do, just in investigating what happens with life after death, interviewing all these people, making these films. And in my most recent collection of the footage that we have for this after death communication documentary that's coming out, I'm sitting across from people and hearing very similar stories in many similar ways about how their deceased loved one is still communicating with them, tells me that consciousness lives on. I mean, and we also know that, right? Through quantum physics, energy doesn't die, it just changes form.
Right.
So I think that there is truth to that. And I also think that there is a way that the consciousness system is trying to communicate with us when a loved one passes. But I'm not quite sure, to be honest. Is it truly when I connect with my mom? Is it my mom? Or is it the one consciousness that creates all, but has the knowledge and maintains kind of like my mother's database of information in this file that you can access at any time? And I can get my mom's opinion on anything at any time because, she had that experience, in this lifetime for that. But is it truly my mom? I don't know. But
Well, it's one and the same though, right?
right. Yeah.
Like the
And
divine consciousness, and because your mom is part of that.
is part, and we return back to that. So, I mean, I have sat across from enough people in my life to believe that our loved ones, when they make that transition, do their best to find ways to communicate, to give us some hope, that nudge us along the way. And out of all the people that we interviewed in this upcoming documentary, only one person who lost his father had never had any paranormal experience. And I found that to be really interesting. Now, he was 12 when his father had died, and he works in the field of hospice. But he said he's never felt that. But that could also be tied to his own belief system, that maybe he doesn't believe that maybe he can communicate with his father. I'm not sure, because he's very scientific and very rational. And,
Yeah.
He did some amazing work. His name is Christopher Kerr. There's been a documentary done about him. He was also in the Netflix documentary Surviving Life, and he has been researching deathbed visions of people. So people who are actively dying and interviewing them while they're actively in the death process and tapping into and recording and documenting their visions as they're making the transition.
Wow.
So, he's kind of very based in that too. And I think when I asked him, I'm like, nothing? You got nothing? Like, how have you got nothing from your dad? Like, whatsoever. And he said, well, it could be that I really do have like this rational mind. And, the way that he thinks may not afford or allow him maybe some of those opportunities that some of us so readily get. Um, so,
But even
so I don't know.
biologically or physiologically, isn't there? Because Greg and I have talked about like the DMT release. So, like,
in your own
maybe-
brain, right.
Yeah. So there's help connecting between the physiological or the spiritual, like by releasing biochemicals in your own mind or brain, or right.
Mhm.
Generally,
Right.
Well, how do we feel about that? I mean, do you think, now we're getting into the psychedelics, but that's, I honestly believe it's going to become more and more part of mental health. I really do. And you and I have spoken about just the business I'm in, and then you take that to the next level, and you've got cannabis, and then you've got mushrooms, and then you got DMT, and you got LSD. I'm a huge proponent of it. I've done the mushrooms. I've not done DMT. I really want to do DMT, but it's not so easy to do. But our brain at night, when we sleep at night, is creating hallucinogenic drugs that we create them in our own minds so that we sleep and we have REM. But do you think that that's like, I always say, someone says, they'll say, well, you should meditate. And I'm saying, I'll just take a mushroom. It shortcuts all that process of meditation. Do you think that we can simulate that process in our brain with what's available to us? When you start talking about the hallucinogenic world, we always end up on a hallucinogenic story.
I had a feeling it was going to go there.
I stay away from current events, so you don't have to worry about that. But I mean, have you seen it? You've interviewed a lot of people. I don't know if you've interviewed people who are hallucinogenic.
Daniel,
astronauts.
is it Daniel Pinchbeck? His name's escaping me. I only interviewed a couple of people on the podcast, a couple of people with ayahuasca.
Oh.
I mean, I don't know. I really like the work of Tom Campbell, who I've interviewed a lot, and he really looks at this as we're more in a virtual reality. And I think our sleep is just another reality frame that we pop into. It's like when you think about the shamans and they say you need to wake up within the dream, right? How do we know that this isn't the dream? Or the dream inside the
Rebirths,
dream.
right? We're always rebirths, yeah.
So
I've heard that
I
before.
think they're fascinating questions, and I think everyone is always studying to try to figure it out. But I believe that the dream state is another state that our consciousness lives in. That it's not just like, okay, we go to sleep and whatever. I truly believe that there is a realm there that can be used and accessed and utilized for healing when we wake up, as well. And I think the psychedelics, I think they're going to come back too. I think that they will be used again, probably in therapy. And anyone that I've ever met who has ever taken them just feels closer to that oneness of consciousness and wants to love more and do better. And it really seems that it opens people up to the larger reality. So I think that will happen.
I think too that everybody talks about the micro dosing. I don't know that it may be effective to a certain degree, maybe neural pathway growth and things like that. But if you're going to really make a change, I just went through something that was I was blown away through it. It was like an exorcism with a mushroom experience, and 3 days later, that person completely changed. And they were an entirely different person. And when I thought they may have had a psychotic break during the process, but they did not. And it was just a process they had to go through. You talk about trauma. When you're talking about that, I know a lot of people who've seen the worst things, carried people out of burning buildings, watched people burn up in cars. There was nothing they could do to save them, all those things. So when you're talking about that state trooper and your work with the military, I'm like, I know lots of people like that, and some have done something to try and fix it, and other people are just living with this god awful shit, and they, it ends up in usually a pretty awful place until they get it cleared up, and that just comes down to the whole mental health thing again. So that's interesting. The life after death, the whole life after death, everybody's in search of that answer, and we probably will never ever have it. The closest thing we get is, in my opinion, is the hallucinogenic world. I don't know if you can the Buddhists and things launch off into meditation and deep meditation and transcendental meditation. And I don't know if you can achieve those things. One of the things too I wanted to ask you about, because you had turned me on to this guy, you mentioned it in your book, was David Hawkins.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just give a little bit of a background. I just am so fascinated by him. He's obviously passed on. But when you look at some of his stuff, he's got some just like really compelling and interesting things. But explain his whole, his whole theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can do that pretty lightly because I'm still in the process of learning all that he has with all of his books. But, in that course that I was taking, I was introduced to the works of David Hawkins. And what I liked was that he was also rooted in mental health. He was a psychiatrist. And he also wanted to understand if our emotions carry a frequency, like everything carries a frequency, right? So here we are back to the whole conversation of energy, and we are energy, and energy doesn't die, it just changes form. So if we are energy and it can change form, well, then so can our emotions, right? We don't have to be stuck in grief. We can change the form of that energy. So what he did was he used a technique called kinesiology, which is muscle testing. And my understanding of that is that the body really cannot hold a lie, and anything that comes close to the body that the body doesn't want, it will weaken, and anything that the body needs that comes close to the body, it will strengthen. So I first learned this technique when I was learning Donna Eden's work, energy medicine. I was practicing with a local practitioner in Saratoga. And so she was, you hold out your arm and there's a certain way to test, but he would say, my name is April, and they would test my muscle. And if I was strong, that means that it was true. And then I'd say, okay, my name is Greg. And then my arm would go down. My muscle literally would get weak every time I told the lie. And so and I tested my cousin when he was younger to see if he was smoking pot. I wanted to see if this really worked. So at Christmas time, I went and I was like, all right, Christopher, put out your arm, and of course he was, right? So, and he tested weak when he was trying to lie.
He's eating a pizza while you're doing it.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. You can test your own muscles for food, for vitamins, for supplements, and things of that sort. So the other thing that you can do is how he was testing people too, was to hold certain emotions and memories that were attached to different emotions on the map of consciousness. So I could have an emotion and a memory about something that I'm really ashamed of and holding shame in my body. And then when he would go and test the muscle, muscle would become weak. And then he wanted to calibrate to see how many cycles per second that energy of shame moves through the body. So that's where he was able to get these numbers on the map of consciousness to say shame is the lowest. Then we have guilt. And then we start moving up. I would need a picture of it because I don't have it completely memorized.
Mm-hmm.
Moving all the way up to the highest vibration of joy and love, which is like 700 cycles per second. So one of his testings that he did was he took vitamin C powder and put it in an envelope, and then took Sweet and Low and put that in an envelope. And he repeated this study over and over again, which eventually got him some notoriety because it was able to be replicated, right? That's what science looks like. So if you can replicate it over and over again.
Yep.
So he would have people hold the vitamin C up to their belly, test them, and their arms and muscles would be strong. And they didn't know what was in the envelopes. Then they would hold the Sweet and Low in the envelope up to their belly, get tested, and they would go weak. So those were products that were showing like what was strong, what made the body strong, what made the body weak. Now, when you bring thoughts of love and joy, your muscle becomes strong. When you think about grief, when you think about sadness, when you think about shame and guilt, your muscle begins to weaken. And one of the things that they say too is that if your arm muscle gets weak, what do those emotions do to your heart? And then there is that connection of holding that lower frequency emotion of grief and guilt in my body, and it was beginning to affect my physical health. So he created this map of consciousness that measures, again, he was able to replicate over and over again how many cycles per second those emotions are moving in our body, all the way from shame up to joy and love. So when I saw that chart, like understanding energy, I'm like, this makes sense. And so it started to empower me. And my teacher was a lot about choice. He's like, well, how long do you want to? I mean, this wouldn't be like a very therapeutic grief um, a response to have to anyone. So I'm just going to say that right now. But he's like, well, what do you choose? You want to choose to think about, your mom and the accident scene, or do you want to choose to think about the happier memories and stuff like that? So it was very empowering for me to realize that even though I had this traumatic grief experience with my mom, I could shift my emotions when I would start to get into a place that was dark and would probably keep me stuck. And I could have ventured into a Great Depression, stayed traumatized if I wanted to continue to repeat that cycle of energy over and over and over again. So I use the map of consciousness as a great explanation of how we can shift our energy from a lower frequency emotion to a higher frequency emotion that benefits our health. And then I incorporate that technique into my art.
When I sleep at night, there's pink noise, there is white noise, did you ever hear The Waitlist? That's a 10-hour musical, and it's supposed to take the first 15 minutes, you're supposed to wipe out your anxiety. You should do it when you sleep or when you're driving down the road. It's Mercodian is the composers of it, but it's a 10-hour, so it's meant for sleep. You put it on when you sleep. But I've woken up like at 4:00 in the morning with it on, and the weirdest shit in the world is going on. Somebody's wondering, are these probing into my brain where I shouldn't be? But I haven't had any negative impacts from it that I know of anyway. But the whole frequency, I don't know if you're familiar with Anthony Holland. Are you familiar with him?
Oh, the name sounds familiar.
He's from Saratoga. He's a music teacher. And he kind of re-established what they were doing in the 1940s with frequency. They were creating plasma antennas, I guess is the best way to explain it. And it was all done on frequencies. And they knew, and he's right up in Saratoga. He's a music teacher, and he brought this back out. I don't know what's going on with him at this point. I think he got a little paranoid, which he probably should be, but they were killing cancer cells, and they documented it with frequency. And what they were doing with the plasma, so what they found out was they couldn't keep a steady frequency. They had to do it in spurts, because if they kept it steady, the frequency would kill all the cells. And that's not what they were trying. It's not like chemo. They were going after very specific. But what they found out is that as high a frequency as they had to combine it with as low, they had to match it with the low frequency. And depending on what the disease was, they had, in the 40s, they were doing away with strep throat. They were destroying the bacteria that was strep throat. But what he found out was they were actually taking that and destroying cancer cells. And it was all frequency. There wasn't any, they had to create a plasma antenna so they get specific into the body. But the whole frequency thing is just far more,
Cymatics.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite topics. Yeah. Manipulation of matter through sound.
Right.
Yes. So during COVID, I got into sound healing. This is like my jam now. This is what I'm doing in my studio.
Come back to Saratoga.
It's all sound. So
tell me about that.
All right. Well, let me tell you something that you're going to want to investigate on this whole situation. So another name that you might want to look into is Mitchell Gaynor. Mitchell Gaynor. I have a few of his books, and I actually had the pleasure of meeting one of his clients or one of his patients who happened to be a client of mine that was diagnosed with cancer. And he was on to the whole sound and nutrition thing. He's also one of the doctors. I don't know if you remember this, but many years ago, like 12 holistic doctors all of a sudden were dead.
Oh, yeah.
Committed suicide.
Yep.
Look at like Google. No, he might have been, but he was also up in Glens Falls.
Okay. But there was a bunch of doctors too, functional medicine doctors that were all killed. They were dropping like flies about 10 years ago, I guess it was.
Yeah, because they were all like on that cutting edge of basically showing we don't need cancer. We can heal stuff with sound and nutrition.
Yep.
And so, and he basically gave her a CD that he had made through music, and she's been in remission ever since. So Mitchell Gaynor is another person if you want to look him up. But yeah, so I started playing the crystal singing bowls and really started immersing myself in the ancient healing of sounds because I got into the map of consciousness and frequency. And now looking about how sound can change frequency and, Jude, you were talking about semantics too, and how that it's almost like we have these beautiful sacred geometry patterns that are going on in our body when sound is properly applied. And I've read the research studies about the cancer cells. They can't exist in high A and high B notes.
That's right. That is absolutely.
And that they just start to shatter, because that's what sound does. It rearranges, reorganizes, or breaks things up.
He did a TED talk and they would show it, and literally the cell would blow up. It would just shatter into thousands of little pieces.
Yeah. So I feel like, sound healing now, especially in Saratoga, everybody seems to be popping up and doing it. A lot of the yoga centers are, but we have actually, I'm actually shifting and moving Hannah's Healing into a totally different business called Sound Sisters to do all sound healing. And I've been researching it, studying it, taking trainings on it. I'm like addicted to buying instruments now. It's a little crazy, but what I have found is that is even more effective than traditional psychotherapy, Reiki. It's like you combine the energy work and sound together, and the way people are healing, it's like 10 times faster. Sound just has this ability to move something within us that I think some of the other modalities just fall short on. So
yeah, and you know what? It makes me really wonder. Okay, especially when you look at all the shit going on in the world. TV's a sound. It's a sound, and you get all of this negative shit that comes in through that system. And I just think it does have negative impacts on people. I think it. The frequency thing. I had looked at it quite a few years ago, and then he had come out. Anthony Holland had kind of resurrected that whole thing, and it's confirming. It's not like it's we think it does. So
right.
It's something that is very it's not anecdotal at this point. It's a reality. And
if you think about it conversely too, like the CIA with psyops, they've used it in negative ways, sound.
Right.
And if you think about your chakra, like clearing the throat chakra, like you use your sound, your somatics that's a big deal. The words we use to heal, to heal or to hurt.
Yeah.
It all kind of ties in.
The human voice is known to be the most powerful instrument of all of them. And that's what we have. And Greg, I know you studied like every freaking religion under the sun, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
So, in all of my sound healing books, that is like usually when people start going into the history of it. In the beginning was the word, and the word was, so it wasn't in the beginning there was light. It's
the first words in the Bible, right? The beginning
right.
of the Bible.
It wasn't light.
All of matter.
The Big Bang, it's like, so if you start going through and thinking about sound and all of the religious studies that you have studied, you'll see that in the beginning it was sound, and that's what we are. We are sound. Right. Sound and light, so it's really interesting when you start thinking back and how for centuries, so many thousands of years, this is how people would heal. We would gather in community, we sing, we chant, we speak, like Jude was saying, sound can be used to hurt as well, to torture.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The things that we do and say. And there were also sound chambers, I think in, the pyramids, right? The acoustics there.
Yep.
And then also, I think in Greece, not only did they have like dream incubations where they would go in and people would like dream and journey, but I believe that they also use that for sound as well.
Yeah. Back in Cuba, when they were hitting the embassy, with sound vibes that was messing up all of the folks in our embassy. That was all frequency and the other thing that is interesting, rap music is on a bad frequency and Kanye West has popped out and talked about that on numerous occasions, but it's it's pretty misogynistic, and Baby It's Cold Outside got taken off the radio, but WAP is still flying away on the radio. It's just so insane. But yeah, the music is definitely a healing. I really believe it's got a healing process, and it's I just think that is just as time goes on in the world, we're uncovering things. I mean, because there's a lot of information available to people. All this stuff was locked up in libraries, and now you can get on a computer, boom, and you can go figure it out. They try to discredit it like I've never seen. They try and discredit all this stuff, and they convince people it's all voodoo and witchcraft, but it's all part of us. It's all our thing. I mean, we're on a vibration, whether you want to admit that or not. Everything vibrates. Another thing with Hawkins that I was really fascinated was every spiritual book that he, I guess, went in and tried to figure the frequency on was all low frequency. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't, it was just kind of fascinating that all the books that we base all of our decision-making and our belief systems on had low frequency.
Right. Yeah. I forget what book that is, but he went in and measured like all of these different things to see what the frequency was. Yeah.
And the other thing with,
and I think,
no, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I was just going to say for the people that are fact or science based, if you don't believe in the power of cymatics, you can look and do some simple visual experiments with sand or water and sound and get a visual representation of how beautiful these sacred geometry patterns are. And it's undeniable that the matter, which could be sand or particles of sand, is moving through the sound frequency. So it's not arguable at this point that at least the sound is creating these. I mean, it looks like sacred geometry. It's just wild.
Mm-hmm. It is.
So it's like a simple experiment that people can do for a few dollars. Like if they want to see for themselves how sound, or listen to Mozart and see how you feel 15 minutes later. So it's an easy experiment to do for non-believers.
Yeah. So a question I have is when you look at the world and you look at the state of the world and the mental health levels today, to get a therapist it's not an easy task. We're all pretty busy. And I don't know if you have seen a trend in mental health that is it alarming? Is it will we get through it as a species? It just seems like there is a lot of really fucked up shit going on.
Yeah, I think our mental health system is in crisis for sure. I think this is also one of the reasons why I stepped out of it. I mean, I don't practice clinically anymore. For basically the main reason that I have found is that clinical mental health does not address the soul. And that is what people seek. We're addressing the mind, but there aren't a lot of conversations about people reconnecting with their soul and with their spirit. And you can only treat the mind for so long. And I feel that I think the mental health field is coming into this with positive psychology and meditation and things of that sort. But I think once we can combine talking very freely and easily about the spirit and the soul and mental health, and there is some sort of really good framework where clinicians are incorporating all of that, then I think you'll see a huge turn in the mental health. But what I have found is that even when I was doing the clinical work, I was always kind of based in energy healing, right? And looking at, other things on the outside. And those were the majority of the conversations that I was having with people was about, like, who am I? Where am I coming from? Like, people were asking the big questions outside of, why is this happening to me? And wanting to know, why is this trauma happening? What's going on? And I think we have to come back to the questions of, like, what is the purpose and why do you think we're here? And, I was on another podcast talking about the book and the grief. And what I found interesting was that I was the only person that was saying and talking about the fact that the only guarantee that we all know is that when we come here, we are going to die. And why do we feel like, oh no, well, that sucks. My mom died and the way that she died. And why did she have to die? Like, it was apparent.
Right.
I'm dying. You're dying. Jude's dying. All your listeners are going to die. And why aren't we embracing death more and talking about it and kind of saying, okay, well, when will it be my turn?
Right.
And, no parent wants to lose a child, right? And that sucks. And nobody wants to lose a family member by them getting hit by a vehicle. And nobody wants to lose somebody that they love by drug overdose. And nobody wants to lose. But the reality is, and this is where I come in of trying to be like just a really realistic thinker, is that we are on a planet that has, planes, trains, automobiles, drugs, vehicles. I mean, anything and everything that we as human beings want to play with can kill us.
Even cell phones,
Yeah.
everything.
So I feel like that's also a huge component that like isn't even talked about sometimes when we're talking about grief, and that's one of the first questions that I'll ask people when they come in who are grieving. Well, where are you based in your spirituality? What kind of belief system do you have around that? What brings you comfort? So I at least know where I can start with a person and talking about that. But it's like, it is the guarantee. We're not living in, at least in this physical body. And we have to start asking, okay, well, then what happens after we die? And a lot of us, I think, are just walking around this planet just thinking like, well, death isn't going to hit me. It's not going to touch me. I thought maybe my mom was going to die, but not this tragically. If I got lucky, maybe she would die a nice long death and I could sit on her bedside and hold her hand, while she died. That's what we all, I think, wish people who we love, that's how they're going to die. But that's not realistic. It's not.
No, and I think the finalization, I think it's a very, I just had my 61st birthday, and I think you really start to look at things far differently when you start, accepting the fact that there's this thing called death, and things become less important. A lot, the things that were important become less important, and you really, if you're really trying to figure out life in general, I think you kind of move into prioritization in a whole different way. It's not so much about money anymore. It's not so much about trips anymore. It's more about what is later, what comes after. There's before and after in life, you have before and after, and death is obviously after. And it's people who are still here are more affected by it than obviously the person that died, and more negatively impacted by it. But you're right. Why do we? I knew a woman. She was my secretary, and when she would go to a funeral, she put on the brightest clothes in the world and say, "Why do we always dress in black when somebody dies?" She actually had it right. We should be celebrating the fact that they've moved to the next place in life. And I think because we don't know, because we don't know what that is, what tomorrow is after that, I think it's a frightening thought. And so the unknown, we just kind of stay away from it. And then we always impact it with the most negative thoughts anyway. And I think that's that's the way our society is, unfortunately. The other thing too, I was to say, how do you think social media impacts mental health?
Oh God.
I think it's really pretty bad. And I think it's pretty narcissistic. And that's a overly used word these days. That's the reason I went to a therapist, was because when your ex gets mad, they call you a narcissist. So you're like, and when you read about a narcissist, I did. I was like, what the fuck? I got to go see a therapist, but I think that, I have met narcissists in my life, and I don't know. Tell me if I'm wrong. I'll probably get in trouble for this. Female narcissists are really, really difficult human beings. That's what I think. I don't know if I met male, a friend of mine has been diagnosed with personality disorder and acute narcissism, I think is what he was. And, he's not a good time when he's drinking, but if he's not drinking, he's okay. But I think that, nobody ever says, such a charming, delightful guy when he's drinking. No one ever says that about anybody. I don't care who they are. But I just don't know. The whole social media thing to me is like such a unbelievable. Everybody can become a star. Everybody can become, create a fake life and show everybody. But I think it's just from the social standpoint, kids don't. So I can't tell you the amount of times I've been out to dinner with young people, and all they're doing is on the phone. They're not talking about anything.
Oh, I know. It's so funny, right?
Yeah.
People are checked out.
Yeah, they are checked out. And I remember when the iPod first got, or the iPhone, iPod, well, it was an iPod first. I can remember being in New York, and everybody was wearing the white, like you've got on, the white earbuds, and nobody's talking to anybody. They didn't have the wireless ones, but everybody was just closed off. They were like in this chamber, and they were going to Starbucks, and everybody was plugged into this matrix, and no one said hello, excuse me, how are you? And you've seen people walk into fountains in the mall because they're on their phone.
Yeah.
They're just completely unaware what the fuck is going on, which is frightening when you start thinking about 5,000-pound ballistics called automobiles, and people are doing the same thing in their cars. But I really do think that there's an expectation people have of life based on that social media, and I think it's pretty damning. And they've come out, there's been studies upon studies that have confirmed that, but the long-term health of people, their mental health, I think, is really pretty influenced by that. That's just another component that we layered on top of our mental health and our expectations, and what people looking at that, trying to decide what they need to do with their life.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I could speak to that on a couple of different levels. What was interesting when my mom died was the news stations like posted this, and I was mortified. And I was thinking, who the F gives you permission to post about my mother that just like got hit? And it's like, and they didn't call me. They like interviewed another person at the motel. They got her name wrong. Parts of the story weren't even correct. And then there were like strangers sharing this. I'm like, wow, this is disgusting. Like, are you people that addicted that, somebody got hit by a car and you don't even know this person, but you want to repost it on your Facebook page? Why? This isn't your mother. So like,
Right.
even the way that my mom's death was handled on social media was like appalling to me. And I'm always so sensitive to people who have lost somebody through that, and like that aspect of it, because it feels like your privacy gets completely like blown open. And then, people making comments that don't even know. I mean, everybody has an opinion now on social media, right?
Unfortunately, yeah.
So that was a really weird experience just from a social media aspect. But the other thing that I would say is I get the privilege to sit behind closed, confidential doors with people and also see what they post on Facebook, but know the reality. And so I love the saying that my dad always says, don't believe anything you see and only half of what you hear, because I have had people coming in telling me about huge fights that they just got into with their significant other and then posting a selfie like, happy anniversary, love. But meanwhile,
I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that.
I mean, I have so many stories of that, and people feeling the pressure like they have to still post things to make them, look like they've got everything together. It is the fakest thing. I mean, and it's very ego driven. I would say I even have a hard time with it. It's like, okay, what do you have to do when you promote a book? Oh, look at me. Look what I did. Oh, look, I'm now a best-selling author because we're number one in all these categories. It just feels like the chakra that it really fuels is the third chakra in our body, which is like that that power, that control. And it's all when it comes down to look at me and look what I did. But that also speaks to what human beings are craving the most, which is love and acceptance.
Right.
And so the other thing that I see, I've just started doing retreats. I'm holding quarterly retreats and coming together in community. People don't want to leave. I mean, people are yearning for it in so many ways to reconnect, but have forgotten how. So I think what you'll see is that there will be a pushback of people wanting to gather again in community, kind of get back to that tribal nature. Sebastian Junger has a great book called Tribe. If you've ever heard that podcast with him and Joe Rogan, I would really recommend it, where he really talks about how it's like we are wired for trauma, but we're also wired to be in small groups, of that tribal mentality of like 22 to 40 or something like that.
That's right. That's right.
So, I think, I think it's a big Band-Aid for just a lot of loneliness that the world feels, and it can never truly take place of a one-on-one conversation and human interaction. And I hope we don't evolve so far away from needing that we just become a really disconnected society.
Well, we're pretty disconnected at the moment, but I think that social media serves good functions too. I really believe, this whole talk of AI, I think AI is a great thing. I think it, is going to become unhinged and go, DEFCON 9 into the Pentagon. I don't know about that, but I think we're a long ways. I'll be dead before that happens. We'll all be dead before that happens, but our kids will be here. Our
Hopefully, it's a little weird, like growing up with Terminator films, and then all of a sudden, like here we are,
reality.
like,
I can admit something that on another podcast, I said that the whole AI thing was fake. We just aren't there yet because it's got to be on a certain computer and it's got to run across molecules and there's software that's got to be compatible with that, the quantum computer, on and on and on. So I was ranting about it. But then a study came out on Amazon, which when you get into the conscious and things, it's kind of interesting. But this study came out on Amazon and they were using AI to create a better experience for their consumers. And it started acting a little quirky. Actually, it was functioning far better than they anticipated. When they went in to look at the code, the AI had written its own code to make it better. So then I was like, okay, I may have been a little wrong about the AI thing. But for a computer, when the internet first came, there was it could collapse and fall down, and it took reams of engineers to fix it. And then they came up with this self-healing software or the process on top of the protocols, and it became self-healing. And you didn't have to, have those teams. It was almost a component of AI, but this was 20 years ago as they started to develop that, make it better. But yeah, I think there's a lot. I think between COVID and social media, Netflix, all those things where people kind of isolated themselves, I think a lot of damage came out of that. Whether, I never know where anybody believes in certain things, but the whole transgender community, which I'm like, hey, if you can be a lampshade. I don't care what the hell you're doing. But I think we've seen a lot of kids, and I think they're kind of mixed up, and I think that they have gone through this process that was facilitated by a lot of different powers, including just the isolation of COVID. I think when we started to come out of that, if you really look at it, the transgender thing became stronger. A lot more people were advocating it. I think they say like now, 30% of students fall into the category of transgender or gender confusion, which I'm just like, how does that happen? I just don't get it. But I think there are a lot of components of things that are in the mental health category that we, again, we're categorizing it so it's not going to get fixed. It's not going to fix society. That's just my personal opinion,
right,
for what it's worth. But the enough said on that subject. But I don't know. I just don't know where it goes. We've got a bit of an isolated society, and I'm not sure what the answer is. It really comes down to, I think, what you're saying, where communities get together, and we are tribal. There's just from primates to us, we're tribal. We're going to travel in groups of people. And I think that you just can't take that out of our DNA, no matter how hard you try. And I just think that that's going to be, I don't care whether you're playing video games with 30 people, you're doing the same thing because you have self-interest and you're doing it. So I don't know. We'll have to see, where it all ends up. So what are you plugging today? So go ahead and plug away. You got your book, go ahead and.
Yeah, I don't know. Got lots of different stuff. So have the book, The Grief Experience. It's available on Amazon, but if people purchase it from my direct website, I'll give you the link to that. I actually sign a copy and I put a couple of gifts in there of my artwork for people to have and just make it a little more personable. So my website is hannahshealing.com. On there, you can connect to my art website. You can connect to the sound healing studio. You can connect to the energy work and the retreats that we're offering and doing that. Basically, everything that I'm doing now is incorporating sound. So it's, sound and energy healing. And I guess the easiest way would just be hannahshealing.com. If people are interested in checking out my podcast and the films that we've created on consciousness, that website is path11productions.com. If you have a membership to Gaia, our films are on Gaia, so you can watch them there. If you have a membership, you can watch them for free. You can also rent them on our website. for $4.99, I believe it is. And our podcast is called Path 11 Podcast. I've taken some time off doing that just because I have this book that was launching, and that I'm also working on the After Death Communication documentary that I'm really excited about. So I'm not sure when that's going to be out. I took 2 months off to do it. And actually, I'm just starting it after this podcast today. So I was supposed to be done with it by March, but working on that as well. And yeah, that's basically where people can find me.
Well, when you come back, when you're done with that documentary, you should come back and we'll talk about it. Very excellent podcast. Thanks for coming here today. We appreciate it very much.
Yes.
Jude, do you have anything? Do you want to go into a deep therapy session right now while we're...
Well, I would sign up for one of those cymatics or sound healing seminars or getaways.
So
What do you call them?
Yeah. So the next one that we have is in March. And so if you're connected to the plant kingdom, this will be really cool. We have a device called Plant Wave. And so it's a spring equinox. So we're doing everything around the equinoxes and the solstice for these retreats to kind of really connect back into nature, right? Get off the cell phones.
Mhm.
And but we're also incorporating a beautiful plant meditation where you can hook up these connectors to the plants. And there's like this whole scientific system where it starts to translate
What the plant's saying.
the plant's singing. So we have this whole afternoon of like plant meditation and sound healing that's going to happen. I'm also teaching people about a West African type of tradition in creating altars with different elements. And this year is considered to be a mineral year. So people are going to learn about the element of mineral. And we do a really beautiful ceremony of basically kind of like burying people in rocks, but not really burying them, but using rocks to put on them to go into trance, to go into meditation using sound. And so that's kind of the theme is about new beginnings. And we cook all of our own food. So we have like homemade meals throughout the day. And that's being held close to the Clifton Park area.
And is that a weekend event or how many days?
It's a Friday night and a Saturday. A friend of mine actually gave us his beautiful, huge house to hold it in. So we are going to be holding it there. And it's a Friday night from 6 to 9, and then an all day Saturday from 10 to 8 o'clock at night. And we do, ritual work with a fire ceremony at the end and stuff like that. So it's really beautiful.
Is a fire ceremony where you guys walk across the coals?
No. With this,
what is a fire ceremony? I don't know.
Okay, so
Tony Robbins was.
In this tradition, it's more like you create a fire with intention, but the fire represents our ancestors. So the fire is kind of the connection of the other world and this world.
Okay.
And so I'm a fire element in this tradition, so I'm able to like man the fire in a sense. And so basically how you use the fire is to connect with your ancestors, with your deceased loved ones. And the fire is used to transmute. So you usually give an offering to the fire, asking the ancestors for help. So usually what people do is they might write a letter to the ancestors or write an intention, and then you offer it some sage, some cornmeal and things of that sort as you're giving it over to the fire. But a lot of intention is with it. It's not just like you're around a fire and throwing stuff into it. It's very ceremonial. You take your time. Each person goes up and gives their offering, to the fire. And then the ancestors work on it for us.
Interesting. I interviewed a guy by the name of Bob Vetter. He's an anthropologist, and he's specifically in America. It sounds like American Indian a little bit, what you're describing. And he was doing, he actually, I guess for lack of a better word, became adopted by the Cherokee Indian tribes. And he was doing peyote ceremonies. And so they were doing these peyote ceremonies, but they lasted for like 32 hours or something. So they would go into these rooms, and I don't know what doses of peyote they were taking, but they were announcing chiefs. And interesting what happened to him. So he had been an advocate for the American Indians. They've obviously been screwed over every which way till Friday. And he's a very interesting guy, but he would do these ceremonies. And he was in the ceremony. After the ceremony, the chief heard he left his mother who had cancer to do this because it was that important to this chief and himself. And the chief, unbeknownst to him, had dedicated the ceremony to his mother. And a week later, her cancer was gone.
Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. But when you're talking about some of this stuff, it really goes back to the healing powers of the esoteric or things we just don't understand. People do understand it, like yourself. You're out there facilitating this for people. And, I just think that people need to keep an open mind about it. I certainly totally, after doing therapy with you, it changed my whole everything about what I believed. I started questioning a lot of things too, which wasn't so great. But I was questioning it because, you become so indoctrinated to bullshit that you just believe it. And it was, I always question things anyway. That's why I studied religion. But that was after therapy, which I highly recommend everybody do. You got to get a good therapist though, which I don't think that's so easy to find. But I think that if you can just keep an open mind, it will definitely benefit you in a big way. And when you're talking about, we did the tap, we did the eye, we did, it all worked. I mean, I always felt like I'd been pushed through a meat grinder, especially when we do the energy stuff. And, I'd walk out of there. I want to take a nap. I can remember driving home from Saratoga, just like, oh my God, am I supposed to feel this way? But it only lasts a couple hours, and then you start feeling better. But you could definitely tell you've been through something.
Right.
It took the load. It took the load when you would clear chakras. It really took the load off my person. And I think it's. I don't know if I probably hadn't told you this, but I get a telephone call out of the blue from a person who says, I was just in a. They went to a medium. I was just with a medium, and your father's name came up. So I start with you with my father, and the day that he died on the 17th, that Christmas Eve, Christmas Day and Christmas Eve, I saw my father, like he was standing right there, like 2 or 3 times. It was a little spooky. I told my ex-wife that. She was with me, but no one else saw him but me. But I mean, I swear to God, I would have told you there, that's him right there, go touch him. And and then throughout the course of 6 years, he became fainter. He almost looked like it was in Miami, and he looked like Gumby, a black Gumby. He was walking around on the outside of my living room. I was in my bed and I could see into my living room, and he was walking around out there, and I knew it was him. This sounds crazy.
Not to me. That's usually what people always say. Okay, this is going to sound crazy. I'm like, continue.
Right. Well, people listening to this may go, oh, this guy's out of his mind. But no, I'm telling you, it changed the dynamics. But anyway, I get this call. I go see this medium. Your name came up in the... and she said, what happened in April? In April, I'm going, what happened in April? I don't know what happened in April. Something with April. It had a dramatic effect on your perception and your going on after all the things you've been through and blah, blah, blah. I left. I'm driving down the road. April Hannah. I just couldn't get the shit together while I was there.
Right.
But it was really weird that this person, said your father came up in this, Greg Kerber, George Kerber came up and he wants to talk to you. Is that not the weirdest thing? But I don't know what's going on with my dad, but there's definitely been, he's made attempts to communicate with me on various occasions. So when you were talking about all that, I'm like, yeah, I don't believe for 1 minute if I hadn't gone and seen you and gone through that process and done the things I had done there. I still didn't like the fact that I picked a Hugh as my animal twice. I'm like, a Hugh? Why not a lion? And you're like, no, it's good that you picked a Hugh. And I'm like, I wanted to like a lion or something. But anyway, I picked a Hugh. I don't know. It's spiritual, I guess. But anyway, yeah, I when I hear this stuff now at this point in my life, it definitely opened up my my mind, which probably wasn't until I had gone through. Until you go through that, it's really difficult. And until something so profound hits you in the head and you realize, what the fuck, how is that possible? You can't really appreciate it or understand it. You really have to, you have to let go. You have to let go of everything that you believe and just say, fuck it, I'm just going to go with this. And once that happens, once you go with the flow of the universe, it becomes a lot easier to
Totally.
understand what's going on. So, but if you've been through it, and you understand it. So, but anyway, with that said, Jude, you got anything you want to throw in there? You want to talk about aliens or shit like that? Or we just
No, but I was in Palm Springs a few weeks ago. I think we talked about that. But they did have they had a cool cymatics. I was at this spa. Well, it was my wife's. Oh, by the way, I am married now to Bree, April. So you should.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful.
She was like, "Oh, did you tell her?" I'm like, I haven't talked to her in a while.
I think about her all
but we
the
were
time when I see
celebrating.
really. Oh, sorry. I just want to say I think about her all the time when I see really cool pictures of food. She's still taking
Awesome.
pictures of food.
Yeah, we're out here and we're based out of Des Moines now, and she works for a big publishing company that makes those Martha Stewart magazines and all the food magazines. But so we were celebrating her birthday in Palm Springs, and this spa had a cool cymatic setup. They had a giant gong, and they laid these like floating yoga mats on this pool. It was out in the desert. And then they waited till the moon came out. So it was this neat, it was like a full moon sound healing, sound bath, I think they call it now.
Yep.
Experience, which is really neat. They also had, they also had these mineral rooms, kind of, because you touched on that earlier. I had been interested in shungite, which is like, it's just carbon but it's
the Russian,
99.
Right? Out of Russia.
Yeah, in Russia, they actually create shungite rooms that calm people down in prisons and schools. And and it's just catching on now here as like a therapeutic sort of, I think, Greg, you were talking, like they have mineral rooms and salt rooms now. So we're kind of catching up with that. But to combine that with the sound healing, I think is pretty amazing.
All we are is cyborgs. We're computers. We really are. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a fucking computer. We have an antenna somewhere around there, and stuff goes in and goes out. And if you can learn to tap into it, it definitely gives you a major advantage in life. I really believe that. And I've had moments where I can't tap into it anymore. Just recently I tap back into it. So, and I think too, April, when you're talking about all this, and people talk about rebirth. I was thinking about this over the weekend reading the book, because I read through a bunch of other stuff, and I really do believe that we are reborn many, many, many times in our existing consciousness. Trauma, deaths, failures, successes. I think, but mostly it's the failures and the difficulties that strengthen our soul, our mind. And I think that those types of things, when you come to the realization, I think there's a realization when you begin to say, hey, I believe that I'm reborn on many occasions. And you have to give up things you may love. You may have to give up things that mean a lot to you, knowing you have to give those things up to move on. And sometimes it's not for you, but it's for that other person. And I think that we are, once you can face those realities, I think it can be life-changing. But it also can be, you go through, you have the grief situation and death and things. I think there's sorrow in those rebirths, and you have to get over those sorrows. And I think that becomes, because you're going to have loss, and when you have loss, you have a void, and it's not an easy thing to deal with. And I think that people have that happen to them, and they're not quite sure why. They become like, oh, why is this happening to me? And it's supposed to happen to you. There's a reason. And everybody thinks this is the end. To your point, it's not the end here. It's not the end. There's something else. And you're being prepared for something else when you have to deal with really difficult things on a regular basis. It's not because the world's cruel to you. There may be a higher calling for you at some point later. And that's what I kind of believe in closing my thoughts. But always a good conversation with April Hanna. You're a good podcast, April, because you just go and talk, and that's what you kind of are hoping that you get when you do these podcasts. So sure. I loved every minute of it. Jude, are you done? Do you have any other words of wisdom? It's
I
okay.
think I laughed, I cried. It's a little bit of everything.
Yeah,
And
it was a big
it's
mix, right?
wonderful.
Big mix,
It's wonderful to
emotional.
hear that April found love too.
Yeah,
That's nice.
Yeah.
April.
absolutely.
We'll have to get into your love story at some point.
Oh, that's wild too. Yeah. So
Oh,
have me
okay.
back on. I could talk about love for days.
You know,
So.
we should get back on and talk about relationships. I think that's something we should do another podcast on. Expectations, relationships, personalities, all those things. I think
soul contracts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that would be a good podcast. So we're going to do that. We'll do that podcast.
Yeah.
But with that said,
yeah. Well, thank you. I would really like to thank you both for having me on, and really appreciate the fact that you did take the time to read the chapter. I know doing podcasts, one of the things that my guests really appreciate it is I really do read people's stuff.
oh
And
yeah,
you can tell it just makes for a better conversation. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to read that, and for thinking of me and having me on your podcast. And it was great to see both of your faces again. And yeah, anytime you want some feminine energy to come on to co-host, or you want to pick my brain about stuff, I'd love to come on again.
She shouldn't have said
Yeah, I
that.
love it.
So
We love that.
definitely will. Well, but when we do the alien, the new alien thing with the whole God, that's what they think. They think that just to kind of talk about energy and things, the new level of the alien awareness thing is pretty fucking interesting. I mean, they're saying that all these guys flying around in spacecrafts are all kind of primitive. The real ones we have to worry about, they're going to materialize through stargates, and that's going to be the real aliens we have to worry about, the Nephilim and all those guys. So it's an interesting thing. It's definitely worth. The channel you're on, they do a lot with that. David, Jude's buddy, does a lot with that.
Oh yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, right, Jude. David, your friend, and
Yeah, he's got some great, interesting. That's a whole nother podcast in and of itself.
Yeah.
Well, I could talk to you guys for hours, so it's been awesome and
Yep.
lovely. And thank you again so much for having me on.
Okay, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.